Millionaire froze when he saw the bracelet he gave his ex on a poor girl's wrist, his daughter. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. When you have everything and nothing left. The alarm rang precisely at 5:30 a.m., like an unshakable ritual in Ethan Walker's life for the past 17 years. His hand emerged from beneath a gray duvet, silenced the alarm, and he quietly sat up. In the soft morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, Ethan's face reflected on the surface, at times resembling a statue carved in solitude. The penthouse, perched atop the tallest building in downtown Boston, was the epitome of luxury. Rare Japanese marble, Belgian crystal chandeliers, a fully integrated AI-controlled sound and lighting system. Every detail meticulously calculated by Ethan. He stepped in the bathroom. The water, at the perfect temperature, was already running. In the mirror, a handsome face stared back, sharp lines, cold gray eyes. A face fortified by years of navigating market storms, negotiating cutthroat deals, sacrificing friendships, mastering psychological warfare, and outmaneuvering legal traps, all to reach the summit. And now, looking back at that face, he saw something he couldn't name: emptiness. The day schedule was read aloud through the voice-activated system. 6:30 a.m., marketing team sync. 8 a.m., board of directors meeting. 10:15 a.m., Asian market potential review. 1 p.m., AI integration contract signing for online clinic network. For Ethan, the word break simply didn't exist. He was the champion of control, relentless work ethic, and iron discipline. But in those quiet moments reclining in his dark leather chair, Ethan found himself unable to do what he did best: redirect focus outward. Instead, he stared out through the massive glass wall. The city below sparkled brilliantly, yet all he could feel was the cold. That evening, after wrapping up a string of meetings from virtual to cross-continental, Ethan uncorked a 30-year-old bottle of scotch and slowly poured it into a crystal glass. He sat alone, watching the pulsing lights of the city below flicker like distant stars. Then his phone rang. "Marcus," Ethan answered. "There's a Forbes feature," came the voice of his co-founder and legal advisor. "You're on the cover." Sharp shot. On the screen, a photo of Ethan staring directly into the camera, the Everest headquarters gleaming behind him. The algorithm architect, Ethan Walker, and his $18 billion empire from a dorm room dream. The article was long, detailed, glowing, praising him as a financial prodigy and visionary leader. But all Ethan could see were the gaps. No mention of skipped classes to help his mother, the overdue tuition fines, or the name Isabel. That name rose to the surface like a long-forgotten melody. Isabel Hart, the woman he once promised to return to when things settled down. But homesick hearts don't wait forever. He typed her name into the search bar. Images appeared. Isabel smiling in the soft glow of local art shows, teaching children how to paint. And then nothing. No trace in the last 2 years. He remembered those college days, driving together in an old car, jazz music playing, dreaming about what could be. He once told her, "When I finish this project, we'll finally have time." She had only smiled, a little sadly. "You always put time at the bottom of your list." That night, Ethan stepped out onto the balcony. Boston's night air was crisp and still. He exhaled a sentence only he could hear. "I have everything except a life." The name from the past. The ballroom lights of the Pacific Innovation Summit shimmered in cool hues of blue and silver, casting a metallic glow over the polished marble floor. Ethan Walker stood alone near the edge of the gathering, one hand loosely cradling a glass of still water, the other buried in the pocket of his tailored charcoal suit. Around him, tech leaders laughed over champagne, exchanged business cards, or flashed rehearsed smiles for photographers. Ethan wasn't in the mood to smile. For most, this was a celebration, a convergence of brilliance, ambition, and the future. For Ethan, it was a reminder, a mirror that reflected not just the staggering success of Walker Dynamics, but also the emotional vacuum he had willingly cultivated along the way. "Ethan? Ethan Walker." The voice caught him mid-sip, unexpected, soft but familiar, like the smell of an old book or a song from a forgotten summer. He turned. "Thomas Whitaker," the man said, offering a hand and an apologetic grin. His hair was grayer, his build softer, but Ethan recognized him instantly. A former classmate from Stanford, someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "Tom, wow, it's been years." 13, Thomas corrected with a laugh. "You haven't changed a bit. Still looking like you walked out of a GQ ad." They exchanged pleasantries, but it wasn't long before Thomas's expression turned more nostalgic. "You know," he said, sipping his wine, "this place, this whole conference, reminds me of that AI competition in '09. You and Isabel Hart, you two were unstoppable." The name hit Ethan like a stone in still water. Isabel. For a second, he couldn't respond. His throat tightened involuntarily, his eyes flicking to the floor. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," Ethan managed. Thomas tilted his head. "You two were close. I always wondered." "We were," Ethan said quietly. She was the only person who ever made me question the path I was on." Thomas nodded knowingly. "You ever reconnect?" Ethan shook his head, slower than he intended. "No, not since New York." They talked a little longer, but Ethan was no longer present. The conversation became white noise as his mind drifted. That night, back in his penthouse, a steel and glass cathedral perched above the world. Ethan stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights sprawling endlessly beneath him. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about market shares or AI ethics. He was thinking about a woman with wind-blown hair and eyes the color of stormy mornings. Isabel Hart. She had been an enigma wrapped in warmth. A software engineer who doodled poetry in the margins of her notebooks, who built neural networks by day and sketched strangers on the subway at night. Isabel had never wanted empires. She wanted moments, connection, presence, and he had chosen power. He hadn't thought of her in so long. It was easier that way, easier to keep her in a sealed mental box labeled what could have been. But now, the seal was broken. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He searched her name, first on LinkedIn, then old university pages, then art blogs. Eventually, he found a trail, thin, almost gone. A feature on women in AI ethics from 5 years ago. A lecture she had given in Seattle 3 years back. Then nothing. No social media. No conference appearances. No recent citations in journals. It was as if she had vanished. The next morning, he asked his assistant to clear his afternoon meetings. Instead of going to the office, he went to the address listed under her last known residency, a small building in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. The buzzer didn't work. He tried calling the landlord number posted by the door. A weary voice answered. "Isabel Hart? She moved out almost 2 years ago. Said she needed quiet. Left no forwarding address." "Did she say where she was going?" A pause. Then no. Just said she needed to disappear for a while. Disappearing was something Ethan understood. He spent the next week tracking leads. An old colleague remembered Isabel talking about a cabin retreat up north. A librarian recalled her donating books and mentioning the coast. Every detail was small, fragmented, but they painted a picture of a woman retreating from the world. Why? What had driven her away? That weekend, Ethan found himself in a coffee shop just outside of Bellingham, nursing a lukewarm Americano and watching rain drizzle against the glass. He wasn't even sure what he hoped to find anymore. Maybe she was married now. Maybe she had a child. Maybe she was gone in ways no search engine could reveal. But he needed to know, not for closure, for something deeper, something that had started stirring that night at the summit and hadn't stopped since. Because in Isabel's absence, something had come alive in him. A hunger, not for success, but for meaning. And in a life where everything was calculated, scheduled, and monitored, this felt like the only honest thing he'd done in years. He stepped out into the gray afternoon, coat collar up against the chill, and walked without direction, letting memory guide his feet. He passed a bookstore with a display of journals, the kind Isabel used to keep. He passed a group of teenagers laughing in the rain, and remembered her saying, "Joy isn't a destination, Ethan. It's a choice." And finally, he passed a street mural, bright and chaotic, with a single phrase painted at the center. We are not our titles. He stopped. He remembered Isabel saying those exact words to him the night he turned down a fellowship they were both offered. The night he chose to found Walker Dynamics instead. It was her handwriting. He turned, eyes scanning the alley. And, for a moment, just a breath, he thought he saw her. A figure in a gray coat, her gait unmistakable. But by the time he stepped forward, she was gone. Gone like before. Gone like always. Back in his hotel that night, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. His inbox was flooded. Investors, engineers, reporters, all wanting a piece of him. But for once, he let them wait. Instead, he opened a blank email and typed a single sentence. To the woman who taught me to look up from the code. If you're still out there, I see you now. And I'm sorry it took so long. He didn't send it. He just sat there, staring at the screen, the blinking cursor echoing like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, Ethan Walker felt something real. Not victory, not control, but loss. And in that loss, perhaps the first seed of redemption. The project that changed everything. The boardroom lights flickered slightly as the screen behind Ethan Walker displayed a swirl of headlines. Words like exploitation, labor violations, and corporate negligence flashed like accusations in neon. Ethan sat at the head of the gleaming mahogany table, arms crossed, jaw tight. Around him, his executive team waited for his reaction, their silence thick with fear and anticipation. The scandal had broken just 2 days ago, a viral expose revealing unethical labor practices in a subcontractor's factory linked to Walker Tech. Ethan hadn't known, not directly, but the world didn't care about nuances. To them, he was the face of it all, the billionaire who built a $19 billion empire on precision, silence, and speed. "We need a strategy," said Claire Monroe, head of PR, her voice clipped and efficient. Not just legal, public, emotional, the kind that shifts the narrative. Ethan didn't flinch. He was used to pressure, used to crisis. But as the screen shifted to a still photo of a child working in a poorly lit assembly line, something lodged in his chest like a splinter. Not pain exactly, not guilt yet, but something. "We launch a community initiative," Claire continued. "Something local, visible. You'll be the face of it. We use your story. The scholarship kid who made it big. Full circle." He nodded slowly. "Fine. Make it real." "What kind of project?" asked James, COO. Ethan looked out the window. From the 52nd floor, the city looked clean, almost innocent. "Tech education," he said. "For underprivileged kids. Coding, logic design." Claire smiled. "Perfect. Future forward. Redemption arc. Make it more than that," Ethan added quietly. "Let's do something that actually matters." 3 weeks later, Ethan walked into a community center in South Boston. His tailored suit clashed with the scuffed linoleum floors, the faded murals, the scent of overused printer toner and cafeteria lunches. He shook hands with staff, nodded politely at curious glances, and forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wasn't here to be moved. He was here to manage the damage. The first session began in a room with mismatched chairs and 14 teenagers, most of whom eyed him with open skepticism. He introduced himself briefly, ran through a well-rehearsed spiel about opportunity, dreams, and coding changing the world. One kid yawned. Another whispered something and laughed. It wasn't until they broke into groups that Ethan noticed him. A boy with dark skin, narrow shoulders, and a gaze too heavy for his age. Jordan. He didn't speak much, didn't look up, but his fingers danced across the keyboard with quiet purpose. "What are you building?" Ethan asked, crouching beside him. Jordan shrugged. "A game." "What kind?" "A maze. The kind you can't win unless you ask for help." Ethan blinked. It was clever. It was sad. And it was brilliant. "That's really good," he said. Jordan shrugged again. "It's just code." But Ethan knew it wasn't. Weeks passed. Ethan showed up each Monday, sometimes just to observe, sometimes to teach. At first, the kids were wary, then curious, then open. And somewhere in the middle, Ethan stopped checking his watch. He learned their names. Maria, who wanted to design educational apps for kids with dyslexia. Raphael, whose mother cleaned offices at night so he could come here during the day. Kamari, who had a gift for digital animation but never believed it mattered until Ethan told him it did. And Jordan, who still barely spoke but now saved a seat for Ethan. It wasn't a program anymore. It was a lifeline. For them, yes, but also for him. One rainy afternoon, Ethan stayed late to help Jordan debug his maze game. The building was mostly empty. Thunder echoed outside. Jordan stared at his screen, frustration written across his face. "I think it broke when I added the timer," he mumbled. "Let me see," Ethan said, taking the second chair. They worked quietly, side by side. At one point, Jordan looked up. "You ever feel like you're just broken inside?" Ethan froze. His hand hovered over the mouse. Slowly, he looked at the boy. "Every day." Jordan nodded, then went back to his code. The next day, Claire called him. "The board loves the press coverage. You with the kids, the transformation. It's gold." Ethan didn't care. Not anymore. That evening, he didn't return to the penthouse. He sat in his car outside the community center, watching the rain blur the world. He thought about the first time he coded a game, age 12, on a hand-me-down laptop in a library that smelled like mildew. He remembered the thrill of making something work, and the loneliness of having no one to show it to. He thought about Isabel, and about Jordan. He realized he didn't want to be the man who built empires but never sat still long enough to see what they crushed. The next Monday, he came early, brought pizza, stayed late. When the session ended, he pulled Jordan aside. "What would it take to build this for real?" "Your game. Make an app. Share it." Jordan looked stunned. "I don't know. Servers. Design help. A real dev account. Done. I'll help you." Not as Walker Tech. As me. Just me. Jordan stared at him. "Why?" Ethan smiled. "Because someone should have done that for me." And for the first time in a very long time, he meant every word. The headlines faded. The scandal passed. But Ethan Walker kept showing up. Not for press. Not for redemption. But because, in a classroom with peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent lights, he had finally started to remember who he was before the suits, before the empire. And maybe, just maybe, who he still wanted to become. The bracelet. The late summer sun spilled gold across the front steps of the community tech center, where folding chairs had been lined up under a modest white tent. Balloons danced in the wind, tied to hand-painted signs made by the students. It was the final day of the mentorship program Ethan Walker had never intended to care about. But now, standing at the back of the crowd, arms crossed over his chest, as teenagers proudly demonstrated the apps they'd spent weeks coding, he felt something stir in him he couldn't name. It wasn't pride, though that was there quietly. It wasn't even guilt, which had dulled into something more persistent, like longing. It was connection, a thread, tentative but real, tying him to this place, to these faces. And then he saw her. She stood a few feet from one of the display tables, her posture calm but eyes keen, like someone watching a world she hadn't yet been invited into. A girl of about 11, slender, with dark curls pinned back from her face and a quiet intelligence in her gaze. She wore a simple white dress, and on her left wrist, a glint of blue. Ethan froze. That bracelet. His heart skipped. A delicate band of silver intertwined with sapphires the color of a twilight sky. He knew every curve, every stone. He had it custom-made 12 years ago. Only one existed. He gave it to Isabel the night he told her he was leaving for San Francisco. A goodbye that was never called goodbye. He moved forward slowly, unsure whether he was breathing. The girl was speaking to a boy at the table, perhaps her brother or cousin. Her fingers traced the edge of a circuit board with casual confidence. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice a little too soft, a little too unsure. She turned, surprised, blinking up at him. "Hi," she said politely. He crouched slightly, eye level. "That bracelet you're wearing. It's beautiful." She looked down at her wrist. "It was my mom's." His throat tightened. "Your mom. What's her name?" "Isabel. Isabel Hart." The world tilted. He felt it in his knees, in the place where breath used to live. "And you are?" "Ava Williams." "Ava." His brain scrambled, trying to fit time and truth together. Ava. She looked like her. Not just the hair or the eyes. The tilt of her head. The curiosity. The careful choice of words. He swallowed. "I'm Ethan," he said finally. She gave a nod, neither nervous nor overly friendly, just respectful. "Observant. Are you one of the program donors?" He nodded slowly. "Something like that." There was a silence between them, not awkward, but heavy. "My mom passed away 2 years ago," Avis said simply, as if she had learned to state this fact without crying. She was an art teacher. She loved color and stories. She wore this bracelet every day until she got sick. Ethan felt the sting behind his eyes. "She was amazing." Ava tilted her head. "You knew her?" He exhaled shakily. "A long time ago." She studied him carefully. "You look like someone who doesn't say everything they're feeling." He laughed softly, a broken sound. "You sound a lot like her." A woman, older, stern but kind, called from a few feet away. "Ava, we need to get going soon. Grandma's waiting." Ava gave Ethan a nod. "Nice to meet you." "You too, Ava," he managed. She walked away, and Ethan remained frozen, staring at the place she'd stood. The bracelet still shimmered, and in his chest, a truth too big to swallow. Isabel had a daughter, and she might be his. That night, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, the skyline buzzing like static outside his window. He held an old photo of Isabel, one he had never quite managed to throw away. Her smile was soft, crooked. She was wearing the bracelet. He opened his laptop. It took him 2 hours and several password guesses to access the last emails they exchanged. From Isabel Hart. Sent 12 years ago. Subject: one last thing. "Ethan, you won't read this. Maybe I won't send it. But if I do, it's only because I need to say there are some goodbyes that don't get said properly, and some truths that come too late. Be well. Be kind to yourself. And know that not everything you walked away from stayed behind you." No attachment. No explanation. He hadn't responded. And now, a girl with her eyes and his bracelet had entered his life, possibly his daughter. He whispered into the empty apartment, "Why didn't you tell me?" But the city had no answers. Only Ava did. And he wasn't sure if she would ever want to give them to him. A name that wasn't there. The marble steps leading to the private cemetery glistened with the remnants of morning rain. Ethan Walker stood motionless at the entrance gate, his umbrella forgotten at his side, one hand curled around the thin folder that had just dismantled his entire world. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy, swollen with a silence that pressed on his chest. The air smelled of wet grass and old earth, and something else, the faintest trace of lilies from a bouquet long wilted. The name carved into the white stone ahead of him was one he had not spoken aloud in over a decade. Isabel Hart, beloved mother, cherished friend. 1985 to 2021. Ethan didn't cry right away. He simply stood there, staring. For all the boardrooms he'd conquered, deals he'd closed, and zeros he'd added to his net worth, he had no idea how to stand before a grave. His feet didn't know where to go. His hands didn't know what to do. His heart beat too loudly for a man who had built a life on quiet calculation. He sank to his knees. The folder opened on his lap. Inside were photographs of Ava Williams, age 11, honors student, community center regular, and as the DNA test now confirmed with 99.7% certainty, Ethan's daughter. The paper clipped to the photos was a copy of Ava's birth certificate. Mother, Isabel Hart. Father. A blank space. A hollow that should have held his name. A void that mirrored the 11 years he'd been absent. Ethan stared at that dash for minutes, the cold of the stone soaking through the fabric of his pants. The silence around him was sacred, broken only by the occasional caw of a distant crow and the hum of cars far off in the city he had once thought he owned. "Why?" he whispered. There was no one to answer. He remembered the bracelet on Ava's wrist, the exact design he had commissioned from a jeweler in Florence. Custom, one of a kind. The clasp had tiny initials worked into the curve, EW. Plus IH. Isabel had kept it. Through the pain. Through the years. Through motherhood. And now, her daughter wore it. His daughter. The word still felt foreign on his tongue. He thought back to that day in San Francisco when Isabel had told him she needed time, that his ambition was eclipsing everything else. He had asked her to wait. She said she couldn't. He left and never looked back. Now, there was no one to call. No one to fight with. No one to make it right. Only a child. Ava. A child who had grown up without him. Who had laughed, cried, and learned to ride a bike without knowing his name. Who had likely asked her mother why her friends had dads, and she didn't. Who had probably made up stories about where her father might be. Ava, who looked up at him with eyes that mirrored his own. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket, but he ignored it. He stayed a long time beside Isabel's grave. Not speaking, just being, just finally, irrevocably feeling. When he rose, it was slow. Every movement carried the weight of a decade. He brushed the dirt from his trousers, closed the folder, and walked away with something breaking open in him. Something old and tightly wound that now unraveled with each step. Back at his car, the world resumed its pace. His driver, Michael, glanced back. "You all right, sir?" Ethan looked at him blankly, then nodded. It wasn't a lie, just an answer with no conclusion yet. Back at the penthouse, the city skyline looked different. Not smaller, not larger, just less important. He placed the folder on his desk, right next to a crystal paperweight shaped like a globe. That globe had once symbolized the reach of Walker Innovations. Now it looked ridiculous beside a photograph of a girl with chestnut hair and bright, intelligent eyes. Eyes too mature for 11. He poured himself a glass of water, not scotch. Then he sat down and opened his email. But not for work. To sophia.garcia@citycenter.org. Subject: Ava Williams. Hi, Sophia. I hope you will forgive the directness of this message. I'm writing to ask if we could speak privately about one of your students, Ava Williams. I understand her grandmother, Gloria, is her guardian. There is something important I need to share, something that involves both personal and legal clarity, but more than anything, it involves a child's future. Please let me know when and where we might meet. I promise full discretion and no disruption to your programming. Warm regards, Ethan Walker. He hit send and exhaled. His empire could wait. There was something far more fragile now at stake. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was simply trying to be present for it. He walked to the window. From the 52nd floor, the city stretched endlessly like it always had. But tonight, it felt less like a conquest and more like a canvas. Somewhere out there, Ava was going to bed without knowing the man who stared out into the night had just discovered the most important truth of his life. He was a father, and he had no idea how to be one. But he would learn, even if it took the rest of his life. The grandmother and the gentle beginning. The soft chime of the doorbell echoed through the small, weathered house tucked away in a quiet corner of Cambridge. Clara Hart, her once dark hair, now a silver halo, opened the door to find a man in a slate-gray suit standing on her porch. He looked nothing like the Ethan Walker she remembered from news clips or magazine profiles. The man before her now held his hat in both hands like a boy asking permission. There was something fragile in his posture, something broken, trying to be whole again. "Mrs. Hart," Ethan began, his voice subdued. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Clara gave a small nod. "Come in, Mr. Walker. But let's be clear, I don't owe you anything. I'm doing this for Ava." He followed her inside, the scent of old books, lavender tea, and memory clinging to the air. The living room was modest, every corner filled with evidence of a life built on love, not wealth. Photos of Ava and Isabel lined the mantel, their smiles echoing through time. Clara motioned for him to sit across from her at the kitchen table. Two mismatched mugs were already filled with tea, one marked with fading words, "World's best mom." "Tell me what it is you think you're doing here," she said, voice firm but not unkind. Ethan took a slow breath. "I only found out about Ava a week ago. If I had known, I would have." "Would have what?" Clara interrupted. "Left your empire to come play house with a woman you broke 10 different ways?" The sting of her words hit with brutal clarity. Ethan didn't flinch. He deserved worse. "I don't have a defense," he admitted. "Only a promise that I want to do right by Ava now. Whatever that looks like." Clara studied him. "Do you even know what right means when it comes to a child? It's not just writing checks or showing up to graduations. It's bedtime stories after exhausting days, fevers at 2 a.m., spelling bees, scraped knees, and heartbreaks. It's staying." Ethan nodded, shame tightening his throat. I want to start by being honest. I can't undo what I missed, but I'd like a chance to earn her trust. Not as a father right away. Maybe just someone who shows up. There was a long silence. Then Clara said, quietly, Isabel used to sit at this table after Ava went to bed, wondering if she'd made the right choice. She never spoke ill of you. Not once. But she always carried that question in her eyes. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. Why didn't she tell me? Clara exhaled slowly. Because she loved you too much to become your second priority. Isabel was strong, but not strong enough to watch her daughter grow up waiting for a man who might never come. Ethan bowed his head. That truth hurt more than any insult. Ava doesn't know yet, Clara said. She thinks you're just the man from the tech center. The one who knows how to fix broken code and gives quiet encouragement. Ethan looked up. And that's how I'd like to keep it for now. Let her know me before she knows everything about me. Clara looked long at him, then nodded. You come for dinner tomorrow. 7 sharp. No suits. And bring a story, not a pitch. Ava loves stories. The next evening, Ethan stood on the doorstep in jeans and a wool sweater, a far cry from the usual armor of press suits and corporate detachment. He held a small, dog-eared book under one arm. The Little Prince. It had been Isabel's favorite. Ava answered the door this time. Hi, she said, her hazel eyes blinking in surprise. Hi, Ethan smiled. Your grandma said I could join you for dinner. I brought a book. She studied him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Is it about robots? Nope, but it is about planets and foxes and secrets. Want to hear a chapter after dinner? She shrugged with practiced indifference. Maybe. During dinner, Ethan didn't talk about business or the future. He asked Ava about school, her favorite art supplies, her dream of designing an animated series about girls who save forests and code satellites. Clara watched with quiet interest as Ava warmed to him. Not quickly, not completely, but with the cautious openness of a child who feels seen. Later, seated on the couch, Ethan read from The Little Prince. Ava leaned her head on Clara's shoulder, her eyes heavy with sleep, but still listening. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye, Ethan read softly. When he closed the book, Ava whispered, That's kind of like Mom. Ethan's heart cracked, but he held steady. Yes, exactly like her. As he left that night, Clara followed him to the door. You did okay, she said. Not too much. Not too little. Thank you for the chance. She touched his arm briefly. Don't break her heart. He met her gaze. I already did that to her mother. I won't do it again. Outside, the autumn wind bit into his skin, but Ethan didn't mind. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing to a boardroom or drowning in quarterly forecasts. He was walking back into something far more important, a life he never knew he needed. And this time, he wasn't walking alone. That night, he lay awake in his penthouse, the book still in his hands, the warmth of dinner still in his bones. The city glowed beneath him, but it no longer seemed so untouchable. He thought of Ava's eyes, so much like Isabel's, and the way she had quietly asked, Can you come again next week? In a quiet, Ethan whispered, Every week, Ava, for as long as you'll have me. And he meant it, the truth and the shattering silence. The rain had started to fall just as the sky turned the color of steel. Ethan Walker sat in the small living room of Clara's modest home, a cup of untouched tea cooling in his hands. The storm outside mirrored the unease brewing within. This was the evening Clara had chosen. She deserves to know, Clara had said gently that morning, her eyes shadowed with something far older than her years. The longer the truth waits, the more it hurts when it arrives. Ethan had agreed, not because he felt ready, but because Ava had the right to know, the right to rage, to question, to grieve, and perhaps, someday, to forgive. Ava arrived from school, her backpack bouncing lightly against her back, curls damp from the drizzle. She kicked off her shoes and greeted her grandmother with a hug. Her eyes briefly met Ethan's, a curious, cautious smile flickering across her face. Over the past few weeks, she had grown more comfortable around him, drawn by his calm presence, by the way he listened, not pushed. Clara sat Ava down gently at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Honey, she began slowly, We need to talk about your mom. And your dad. Ava blinked. You mean Mr. Walker? Clara nodded. Ethan remained silent, his throat locked tight. He's your father, Ava. The silence that followed was not the kind that filled rooms. It cracked them open. Ava stared at her grandmother, then at Ethan, then back. The color drained from her face. No, she whispered. No, he can't be. Clara reached out, but Ava recoiled. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. Why didn't he ever come for me? Her voice sliced through the air, trembling with a mixture of disbelief and rage. Her eyes locked onto Ethan's. You knew about me? Ethan stood, words crashing against the walls of his mouth. I didn't. Ava, I swear I didn't know. Not until recently. If I had, then why did Mom tell you? Why didn't you look for us? Because, Clara said quietly, her voice a fragile thread. Your mother thought it was better that way. She thought if he didn't know, he couldn't disappoint you. Ava turned her fury toward Clara. You too? You kept this from me? My whole life. Ethan took a step forward, his voice low and cracked. Your mom. She didn't tell me, Ava. But if she had, I would have been there. I missed everything and I can't fix that. But I'm here now. I want to know you. You don't get to want anything, she said, a tear rolling down her cheek. You weren't there when I cried for her. When I made birthday card for someone I thought was dead. You were out, being rich and important. Those last words fell like stones. She ran. The front door slammed shut behind her. Clara made a move to follow, but Ethan shook his head. Let her breathe. It was hours later when Clara received the call from a neighbor. Ava had been seen sitting alone in the park 2 blocks down, curled up on a bench, hoodie pulled over her head. Ethan drove there without a word, heart pounding like a war drum. He spotted her instantly. The swing set swayed in the wind, empty. She sat beneath the shelter of the gazebo, arms wrapped around her knees. Ethan approached slowly, the gravel crunching underfoot. Mind if I sit? Ava didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. He sat beside her in the silence. I came to the park once with your mom. It was our second date, Ethan said quietly. She brought sketchbooks, drew pigeons and tree trunks like they were made of silk. Ava sniffled. She loved that, drawing everything. She said it helped her hold onto the world. Ethan nodded. She drew me once. I never looked more alive. Ava turned toward him then, the fire in her eyes dimmer, but not gone. You really didn't know? He shook his head. I was young, ambitious, and stupid. I left thinking there'd be time for everything later. But there wasn't. Ava looked down at her lap. From her backpack, she pulled a small leather notebook, weathered, soft-edged. This was hers. I found it last year. She wrote in it every night. I didn't understand some of it then. Maybe you should read it. Ethan reached out slowly, like one might accept a sacred artifact. The notebook fit in his hand like something that had been missing. He opened to a random page. Tonight, Ava asked why her birthday cake only had 2 names, hers and mine. I told her some names live in the heart, even when they don't live in the house. Another page. I saw Ethan on a magazine cover today. He looks the same. Ambitious. Brilliant. Tired. I almost wrote him. I want to believe he would have wanted this life. But I'm scared. Scared he'd feel trapped. Scared Ava would sense it. So I hold on to the bracelet instead. It reminds me of who we were before dreams cost so much. Ethan pressed the notebook to his chest. She loved you, Ava whispered, even when it hurt. I loved her too, he said, voice breaking. And I missed every chance to prove it. They walked home together. Neither said much. At the door, Ava turned. This doesn't fix everything. But I don't hate you. Not anymore. Ethan nodded, blinking back the sting in his eyes. That's more than I deserve. She cracked a thin smile. Maybe, but maybe we both get to start over. As she stepped inside, Ethan lingered on the porch, notebook in hand, the storm above giving way to stars. That night, he read every page of Isabel Hart's words. Her love, her fears, her unspoken hopes. And he knew, whatever time he had left with Ava would be different. Earned, not assumed. Built, not bought. With tears streaming freely for the first time in years, Ethan whispered into the quiet, I'm here now, Isabel. I won't waste another day. He didn't know what the next chapter would look like, but it would be written with truth. and love. Real, patient, healing love. The headlines and the heart. It began with a whisper, a grain of rumor that somehow turned into a tidal wave. Ethan Walker sat in the boardroom of Walker Technologies, the walls lined with screens and data graphs, when his assistant rushed in. Her expression wasn't just urgent. It was fearful. "It's out," she whispered. "The Ava story." Ethan's chest tightened. "How bad?" She turned the tablet toward him. On screen was the headline from one of the top gossip tabloids. Tech mogul's secret daughter. 11-year-old discovered after mother's death. The photo beneath showed Ethan at the FutureSpark graduation, bent down speaking to Ava, her sapphire bracelet glinting in the light. "It's gone viral," she added. #WalkerDaughter is trending on every platform. Reporters are camped outside your building. They found Clara's address, too. Ethan stood, the room spinning. Not because of shame or image, but because Ava, she would see this, hear things she didn't understand, be judged by strangers. His phone buzzed again. Messages from PR, legal, the crisis team. Suggestions flew. Deny, delay, reframe the narrative. The default response in the corporate world, control. He ignored them. Instead, he called Clara. She answered on the third ring, her voice taut. "We're staying with a friend." Ava's not talking. Ethan closed his eyes, pain rising like a tide. "Can I see her?" "She'll decide," Clara replied. "You have a lot to undo." That evening, Ethan met Ava at a quiet park Clara had suggested. Dusk was settling, and the air was soft with the scent of wet leaves. Ava sat on a bench under an elm tree, her arms folded, hoodie pulled over her head. He approached slowly. "Hey," he said gently. She didn't look at him. Everyone at school knows. He sat on the far side of the bench, leaving space between them. "I didn't want it to happen like this. I didn't even know it would." "They said you're fighting my uncle in court," she said flatly. "Is it true?" He hesitated. "I thought I had to fight, to prove I had a right." She turned to him finally, her eyes fierce. "So you were going to use lawyers and money to win me like a prize?" He flinched. "I never saw you that way." Ava stood up. "Then why act like it? You think money fixes everything." Her voice cracked, and so did something in him. He stood too, meeting her gaze. "You're right. That's how I used to fix things. With contracts. With control. But this is different. You're different." She crossed her arms. "Then stop fighting. I don't need a warrior. I need someone who shows up. Quietly. Consistently." Ethan nodded slowly, emotion clogging his throat. "Okay. No more lawyers. No more court." She turned her back, but her shoulders eased. "Good. Because I already have a family. Grandma. Uncle Ryan. I don't need you to fight them." He dared a question. "What do you need?" She turned back to him. "I need to know who you really are. Not your net worth. Not your company. You." The next morning, Ethan called his legal team. "Withdraw everything," he said. "Mr. Walker," his lawyer began, "you'll lose all formal guardianship. This isn't about power. It's about trust. If she's going to let me into her life, it has to be her choice." PR called next, proposing interviews to reclaim public sympathy. Ethan declined. "No press. No statements. This isn't a campaign." Instead, he wrote a letter. Handwritten, folded and sealed. He gave it to Clara. "Please give this to her. Whenever she wants it." Clara took it, reading the depth in his eyes. "Maybe you are more like Isabel than I thought." In the letter, Ethan wrote not like a CEO, but like a man learning to be a father. "Dear Ava, I've spent my whole life building things, but I never knew how to build what matters most. I can't undo the years I missed. I can only show up now, not to claim you, but to earn your trust. You're not my project. You are my daughter, and you get to decide what that means. I'll be here, not just when it's easy. Always. Love, Ethan." Weeks passed. The media circus faded. Another scandal took the spotlight. Ethan declined every invitation to speak, every chance to reshape his image. Instead, he showed up to volunteer Saturdays at the community center. Quietly. No entourage. Just him in a room full of kids try to understand Python or Scratch or HTML. And sometimes, Ava came too. Not always. Sometimes just to sit in the back. Sometimes to draw. Once to ask him, with eyes a little less guarded. If I built an app for Grandma to track her medicine schedule, would you help? He smiled. I'd love that. That night, Ethan stood alone in his penthouse. For once, he didn't feel alone. On his desk was Ava's sketch of the app interface, and beside it, a photo of Isabel he hadn't looked at in years. He whispered into the silence, I'm trying. I promise. The language of patience. The sharp clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug echoed through the kitchen of Clara Williams' modest home as Ethan Walker stirred a second cup of tea, his tailored sleeves rolled up to the elbows. The penthouse boardrooms and high-gloss strategy sessions seemed a world away now. It had been nearly 2 months since he stepped down from daily operations at Walker Technologies. Not in defeat, but in deliberate choice. He didn't miss the boardroom. He missed the time he'd already lost. Ava sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, sketching something in a spiral-bound notebook, headphones half on. The concentration on her face made Ethan smile. It reminded him of Isabel, how she used to tilt her head when drawing, brows furrowed with intensity. What's that one about? Ethan asked, gesturing to her drawing. Ava didn't look up. It's a story about a girl who can hear the wind speak. She thinks it's her mom. Ethan paused, the spoon still in his hand. Is the wind kind? Ava finally looked at him, eyes gray like Isabel's. Sometimes, but sometimes it's angry, because the world forgot what it took. Ethan didn't respond. He simply set the tea in front of her and sat down. He was learning not to fill the silence with his voice, but with his presence. It had been a difficult transition, from commanding 1,000 employees to sitting still with one grieving child. But maybe this kind of stillness was the most powerful thing he'd ever done. Clara watched the two from the living room, her fingers still on the binding of a family photo album. She'd resisted Ethan at first, like a guard dog on a short leash. But weeks of him showing up with no expectations, offering to cook or clean, quietly listening to Ava talk about her art, had begun to wear down the barricade of mistrust. One evening, as Ethan washed dishes and Ava dried, Clara finally spoke. She's like Isabel, you know, stubborn, quick to protect others. But there's something else, a steadiness that wasn't always in my daughter. That's you. Ethan turned from the sink, dish towel in hand. You think so? Clara nodded slowly. You're both in her. She's got Isabel's fire, but you're restraint. That Saturday, Ethan took Ava to the Lakeside Art Fair Isabel used to love. The fair hadn't changed in over a decade. Children running between stalls, the scent of fried dough and old books in the air, street musicians playing near a fountain. Ava was reserved at first, but curiosity took over. She used to bring me here, Ava said, picking up a ceramic owl figurine. I don't remember much, but this smell, it feels like her. Ethan crouched beside her. She loved the caramel popcorn here. I like kettle corn better, Ava replied, challenging. Then kettle corn it is, Ethan said, waving to a vendor. Later that day, as the sun dropped low, Ethan handed Ava a small box. She opened it carefully. Inside, a sapphire bracelet glinted in the dying light, smaller than the one her mother wore, but unmistakably similar. This one had tiny letters engraved near the clasp. E&A. It matches Mom's, Ava whispered. I had it made for you. A way to remember that you're part of something bigger, part of both of us. Ava slipped it on slowly, almost reverently. Her arm was trembling. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Ethan replied softly. Just know I'm here, whenever you're ready. Literacy sessions, but soon found himself sitting cross-legged with kids, troubleshooting coding bugs, offering snack money, listening. Ava started opening up, bit by bit. She asked Ethan about Isabel, about what they used to laugh about, how they fought, what her handwriting looked like. She used to leave notes on sticky pads, Ethan said one evening. On my laptop on the fridge. Don't forget to water the plants. You left the coffee on again. Love you. Do you still have any? He thought for a moment. Maybe. In a box I keep. I could look. I like that, Ava said. The word like was doing more work than it let on. It meant trust. It meant maybe. It meant healing. One night, Ethan stayed late at Clara's after tutoring some teens. Ava had fallen asleep on the couch, a sketch pad still resting on her stomach. Ethan tucked a blanket over her gently. Clara stepped beside him. She never used to sleep through the evening, always afraid she'd wake and I'd be gone. Ethan swallowed hard. I hate that I wasn't there. Clara looked at him. But you're here now, and not because of guilt or show, because you choose her. Ethan nodded slowly. Every day. The next week, Ava asked to visit Ethan's apartment. It was the first time she'd shown interest. He spent hours making it less sterile, more inviting. He added beanbags, a small easel near the window, even stocked the fridge with her favorite orange soda. When she walked in, she said nothing at first. She wandered. She opened cupboards. She stood by the window. It's different than I imagined. Bad different. Just different. Then she smiled. But the art corner is cool. And I saw the kettle corn on the counter. That helps. They sat on the couch, watching the skyline together. Ethan handed her a small envelope. Inside were 2 photographs, one of Isabel in college, painting by the lake, the other of baby Ava in a hospital bassinet, a hospital band reading Heart, Isabel. Ava studied them both. She looked happy. She was, especially the day you were born. How do you know? Because she sent me a voicemail that night. I didn't pick up, but I still have it. Ava looked at him, tears welling. Can I hear it? Ethan played it. Isabel's voice came through, tired, laughing, full of joy. She has your eyes, Ethan. I don't know what happens next, but today she made me brave. Ava cried quietly, Ethan's arm wrapping around her shoulders. No more boardroom deals. No more media scripts. Just this. Just now. A man, a child, and a long road to home. In a quiet moment weeks later, Ava said something he wouldn't forget. People used to say I looked like Mom. Now, I think I look a little like you too. Ethan blinked back tears. That's the best thing I've heard all year. In the end, fatherhood didn't arrive with a legal paper or a DNA result. It came in the waiting, the listening, the showing up again and again without expectation. Not through power, but through patience. The digital museum. The autumn sunlight poured through the wide windows of the community center, catching the edges of each glass frame hung in the new exhibit room. A quiet hum filled the air as students adjusted cables and checked speakers. At the center of it all stood Ava, now 12, her hair tucked neatly into a braid, her brows furrowed in focused concentration. Careful with the projector, Derek, she called, pointing to a fragile lens clutched in the boy's unsure hands. Ethan stood in the back of the room, out of view. He hadn't been invited yet. Clara had only told him, quietly, that Ava was working on something. Something important. She says it's not ready to share, Clara had said. But when it is, you should see it. So Ethan waited and watched. Each student seemed to know exactly what part they played in bringing Ava's vision to life. A digital screen showed Isabel's sketches slowly rotating in a gentle loop. Her old paintings had been scanned in high resolution and paired with audio clips of her voice, taken from an old voicemail Ava had refused to delete. You're doing amazing, honey. Isabel's voice rang out softly. The recording crackled with age, but it made Ethan's chest tighten as though the years had collapsed into this very moment. Clara approached him with a faint smile. She's ready. He nodded and followed her in. The lights dimmed. A few other community members filtered in, taking their seats. Ava stepped up to the front, nervous but steady, holding a remote in one hand and a thin piece of folded paper in the other. This, she said, her voice just above a whisper, is for anyone who thinks they know someone, but maybe only saw part of them. She clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, a picture of Isabel, young and smiling, her auburn hair backlit by sunlight. This was my mom, Ava began. You might have known her as an art teacher, or just a quiet neighbor, but I knew her as something else. The slideshow continued. Snapshots of Isabel holding a toddler Ava, dancing barefoot in the living room, painting with a mess of colors on the balcony. Each image was a frozen piece of a life Ethan had never touched, a love that had grown without him. My mom wasn't perfect, Ava said, but she was brave. She raised me on her own, never once letting me feel like something was missing, even when we had so little. A short video played. Isabel teaching Ava how to shade with charcoal, her hands gently guiding Ava's smaller fingers. She never talked badly about my dad. Ava continued, eyes flicking briefly to Ethan before turning back to the screen. She just said he was building something big, that maybe one day he'd come looking. Ethan felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes. This project is my way of showing him, and all of you, who she was. Not just someone he used to love, but someone I still love every day. The final image flickered on screen, a close-up of Isabel's journal. The page turned to a passage Ava had highlighted. I hope Ava will understand that I did everything I could. I hope one day he'll see her and recognize the best parts of himself. I hope he becomes the kind of man I once believed he could be. The room was quiet. Ethan stood slowly. Ava looked at him, her eyes uncertain. He walked toward her, no grand speech, no dramatic moment, just a man reaching for his daughter. Thank you, he said, his voice cracked, for letting me see her through your eyes. She stepped forward and hugged him, not out of obligation, not for the cameras, but because she chose to. That night, Ethan loaded the digital museum onto his home server. Each frame, each soundbite, each note from Isabel became part of his world. In his private study, beside his awards and global recognitions, he added one more frame piece, Ava's printed journal entry with the words Isabel had written, a reminder of who she was and who he was finally becoming. That winter, Ethan launched the Heart Initiative, a grant in Isabel's name for single parents pursuing careers in the arts. When asked at the press conference why he started it, he simply said, "Because a great woman once told me that the most beautiful things grow when someone believes in them. And I finally understand what she meant." The cameras flashed, but Ethan's eyes were on Ava, seated in the front row, her mother's bracelet on one wrist, his on the other. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a man making amends. He felt like a father, and that made all the difference. A different decision. The winter sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Walker penthouse, casting golden light on a space that had, over the last year, quietly changed. The once sterile apartment was now layered with signs of life. Ava's sketchbooks open on the coffee table, a new dog bed in the corner, occupied by a sleepy golden retriever named Pixel, and the scent of lavender from the diffuser she insisted helped her focus while studying. Ethan Walker stood in the kitchen, 2 mugs of hot chocolate warming his hands. He watched as Ava sat cross-legged on the living room rug, presenting Clara with a slideshow of her latest school project, a digital narrative of children who coded their way out of poverty. He smiled. It was a soft, quiet kind of joy, one that didn't make headlines or show up on quarterly earnings. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the headquarters of Walker Systems for what would be his final board meeting as CEO. The room was as he remembered, all glass, marble, and restrained luxury. His executives, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, were already seated, tablets in hand. Marcus Chun, his oldest friend and company counsel, raised an eyebrow as Ethan took his seat. "You're 20 minutes early. That's either a very good sign or a very bad one." Ethan smiled faintly. Depends on how you define good. When the meeting began, Ethan walked to the head of the room with a confidence that came not from dominance, but from clarity. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today, I want to talk not about our next quarter, but our next chapter." There was a pause. Phones hovered in midair. Heads tilted. Effective immediately, I will step down as CEO of Walker Systems. Silence. Then Marcus coughed audibly. "Ethan, we have an IPO expansion on the horizon. You walk away now, the board." "We'll be fine," Ethan interrupted gently. "I've spent years building this company to run without me. It's time I built something else." He took a breath. "I've established a foundation, the Isabel Hart Fund. It will support single-parent artists and fund programming education for underprivileged youth." A woman at the far end of the table blinked. Isabel Hart. She was Ava's mother. An artist. The kindest person I've ever known. The air changed. Tension softened into something resembling reverence. After the meeting, Marcus followed Ethan into his now nearly bare office. "You're serious," he said, studying the half-packed bookshelves. "Dead serious." Marcus folded his arms. "You okay?" Ethan paused, looked out the window. "For the first time in my life, I'm not measuring value in dollars, growth curves, or media reach. I'm measuring it in hours with Ava. In the look on Clara's face when Ava wins her first coding award. In the sound of laughter around a dinner table that isn't buried under NDAs. He turned to Marcus. So yeah, I think I'm more than okay. In the following weeks, the announcement went public. Business media called it unprecedented. Billionaire CEO walks away to build foundation in honor of lost love. Some speculated it was a PR stunt. Others thought it was a breakdown. But those who knew Ethan understood. It was a breakthrough. The Isabel Hart Foundation opened in a restored brick building in the heart of the city. One wing was dedicated to art therapy for children who had lost a parent. Another housed a fully equipped tech lab where students learned to code, not just for careers, but to tell their stories. Ava designed the foundation's logo herself, a stylized heart formed from two interlocked brackets, symbolizing both love and code. Clara became the unofficial grandmother of the foundation, baking lemon cookies for every major milestone. Marcus served on the board pro bono, and Ethan? He taught twice a week, sometimes more. He wasn't the best teacher, but he was the most present. One chilly spring evening, as he locked up the foundation after a long day, Marcus found him on the front steps, sipping from a thermos. Still here. Ethan nodded. Ava's at a sleepover. Clara's binge-watching crime dramas. I thought I'd enjoy the silence. Marcus sat beside him. You miss it? The boardrooms? The rush? Ethan considered. Sometimes. But then I see a kid light up because they got their code to run for the first time, and I realize I never felt that much joy watching a stock price climb. Marcus smirked. You've gone soft. No, Ethan replied. I've gone real. They sat in silence for a while. Ethan finally broke it. Marcus. Yeah. Thanks for not trying to talk me out of this. Wasn't my place, Marcus said quietly. But for the record, I'm proud of you. Isabel would be too. Ethan closed his eyes against the sudden sting behind them. I hope so. The camera would fade here if this were a film. Two old friends under street lamplight, the buzz of distant traffic, and a man who had everything finally finding what really mattered. Not legacy, not profit, but presence. And the quiet, steady kind of love that builds a life worth remembering. A family of three, imperfect but real. The sound of keys jingling in the hallway used to mean little to Ethan Walker. For most of his adult life, it had meant an assistant arriving with files or a housekeeper coming to quietly reset the penthouse to perfection. But now every small, everyday sound carried weight. And when the door creaked open that Tuesday evening, it wasn't staff who stepped in. It was Clara, arms full of fresh groceries and a weary smile that somehow still radiated calm. I brought those little oranges Ava likes, she said, closing the door behind her. And a lemon pie, because I figured you still haven't figured out how not to burn the crust. Ethan chuckled. Guilty, but I've almost perfected scrambled eggs. Clara raised a skeptical eyebrow. We'll test that Sunday. Their rapport had settled into something warm and quietly essential. After months of uncertainty, Clara had finally agreed to move into an apartment just 3 blocks from Ethan's. It had taken time and many earnest conversations for her to trust that Ethan's presence wasn't a phase or a performance, but something steady, a promise kept. Ava, now almost 12, moved fluidly between both homes. She had her own space in Ethan's apartment, a bright, plant-filled room filled with art supplies, tech gadgets, and a view of the skyline she often sketched in charcoal. But more than the room itself, it was the rhythm they had found together that mattered. Dinner on Wednesdays, weekend science projects, quiet evenings where Ethan sat beside her as she coded, not offering solutions, just being there. It was new terrain for both of them. Ava with her gentle hesitations and piercing insights. Ethan with his clumsy, sincere efforts. One Friday night, Ethan stood at the stove, trying not to burn tomato sauce, as Ava quietly worked on her laptop at the dining table. Dad, she said suddenly. He turned, startled. It was the first time she'd used the word without prompting. Yes. She looked up. Can you read over my speech? For the school talk next week. We have to share something important to us. Ethan dried his hands quickly and crossed the room. As she turned the screen toward him, her voice dropped. It's about time and second chances. He read silently, each word etched in the quiet voice she always used when she spoke about Isabel. When he finished, he looked up, his throat tight. "You wrote this? All of it?" Ava nodded. He tried to speak, but the words snagged. She noticed. "You can cry, you know," she said softly. "I won't think less of you." And so he did. The school auditorium was full that morning. Parents filled rows of fold-out chairs. Ethan sat beside Clara, who held a travel mug of tea and clutched Ava's coat like a talisman. Ava stepped onto the stage in her navy cardigan and jeans. Her voice, small at first, rose with clarity. "When I was little, I thought family meant having the same last name or living in the same house. But then I met someone who changed that. Someone who missed the first 11 years of my life but showed up right when I needed him." Ethan gripped the edge of his seat. "My mom used to say people aren't perfect, but moments can be." The moment he chose to stay, to show up again and again, that was perfect. So now, when people ask who my dad is, I say it's Ethan Walker. She glanced toward him then. A pause. "He used to be a tech CEO. Now he's my dad, and that's the best title he ever had." Tears slipped down Ethan's cheek, unhidden. He didn't brush them away. After the applause, after the warm hugs and the proud smiles, Ethan held Ava close outside the auditorium. "You didn't have to say any of that," he whispered. "I know," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "But I meant it." Later that night, the three of them sat together in Ethan's apartment. The city buzzed beyond the glass, but inside was only the sound of forks against plates and the occasional burst of laughter. Clara had taken over the kitchen with familiar command, and Ava had curled up with a sketch pad nearby, doodling a trio of stick figures that looked suspiciously like them. Ethan leaned back, watching them, something shifting in him. This wasn't the life he had planned. It was imperfect, raw, sometimes difficult, but it was real, and that made it everything. The morning of the grand opening dawned gently, a soft spring light spilling across the brick walls of the new Isabel Hart and Ava Williams Community Center. The building stood quietly proud on a corner in East Boston, not flashy or imposing, but welcoming, its walls painted in warm earth tones, tall glass windows reflecting the rising sun. Inside, the air was thick with final touches, volunteers setting up chairs, arranging art installations, checking sound systems. Ethan Walker stood alone in the side corridor near the atrium, straightening the lapel of his navy blazer with trembling fingers. It had been a long time since he felt nervous. Corporate launches, investor meetings, even interviews with global media had never fazed him. But this was different. This wasn't about profits or projections. This was about two names carved into stone beside the glass entryway: Isabel Hart and Ava Williams, his daughter, and the woman who had once held his heart without ever needing to ask. He watched through a small window as Ava rehearsed her speech with her grandmother Clara nearby. The girl's dark curls were pulled back in a simple braid, her blue dress modest but graceful. Her voice, still carrying the brightness of youth, held a remarkable steadiness. He couldn't hear her words, but he didn't need to. The way she moved, the way she gestured with a hand over her heart, Ethan knew. She was speaking from a place of love, of memory, of something he was only beginning to earn. Guests began arriving soon after. Local city council members, nonprofit partners, former students from the pilot program that had started it all. Ethan kept his distance at first, observing the stream of people who had come not for him, but for the vision his daughter had nurtured, a space for young people to dream with both their minds and their hands. By 10 o'clock, the main hall was full. Art installations lined one wall. Pieces by young community artists inspired by themes of resilience, heritage, and technology. On the other side, demo stations displayed student-built projects, a weather monitoring system, an app for food bank distribution, a 3D-printed prosthetic hand. Ava stood at the podium, waiting for the microphone to be handed to her. The chatter quieted. Ethan moved to the back of the room, standing beside Clara, who reached out without a word and held his hand. Ava looked out at the crowd and took a breath. "I never got to introduce my mother to most of you," she began, her voice carrying with remarkable clarity. "But I hope you get to know her today through what we've built here." She believed art wasn't just decoration. It was survival, and she believed that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple through a life like a stone on still water. There was a pause. When I first met Ethan Walker, I didn't know who he really was. And when I found out, I didn't know what to do with that truth. But over time, he showed me that becoming someone's parent isn't about biology. It's about choice. It's about showing up, over and over again, especially when it's hard. Ethan lowered his head. Ava continued, her voice catching for the first time. He missed the first 11 years of my life. But since then, he hasn't missed a thing. And now, we share this space together. A place where no child has to feel invisible. Where every story matters. Where every dream matters. Thunderous applause filled the room. As she stepped down from the podium, Ethan noticed something shimmering on her wrist. The sapphire bracelet, the one he had given her on her 12th birthday, engraved with their initials, E&A. She wore it with pride. The ribbon-cutting ceremony followed. Ava took the scissors and, with a steady hand, sliced the ribbon across the glass doors. Flashbulbs popped. People cheered. Ethan stood just outside the camera's frame, tears clinging to the corners of his eyes. He was no longer the man who demanded to be in the spotlight. He didn't need applause. He didn't want credit. When a reporter later asked him how it felt to have funded the center, Ethan gave a quiet smile. "I didn't build this place," he said. "A child's forgiveness did." That evening, after the guests had gone and the lights inside had dimmed to a quiet glow, Ethan and Ava returned to the atrium. They sat side by side on the wooden bench beneath the center's dedication plaque. "Do you think Mom would have liked it?" Ava asked, her voice small now in the stillness. Ethan turned to her. "She would have loved it, because it carries everything she believed in. And more importantly, it carries you." Ava leaned against him. "I used to wonder what it would be like to have a dad who knew how to be quiet with me. Not fill the space, just share it." He put an arm around her shoulders. "I'm learning, one breath at a time." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The city pulsed with life. And inside that modest brick building, two hearts, one healing, one learning to love again, rested quietly in the afterglow of something sacred. A beginning, not just a conclusion. A legacy not of wealth, but of belonging. Holding on to what matters. The wind outside Ethan Walker's penthouse had softened to a spring breeze, the kind that smelled faintly of budding leaves and beginnings. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city looked alive and breathing. But inside, the luxury of glass and steel had started to feel more like a frame than a fortress. It no longer protected him from the ache of lost time. It simply reminded him of how far he'd come, and how far he'd wandered from the very things that mattered. Tonight, Ava had asked him to come home early. Not to the penthouse, to the community center. Their center. The Isabel Hart and Ava Williams Community Center, now lit up like a lighthouse in the heart of the neighborhood it served. Ethan hadn't asked why. He had learned to listen when Ava asked something of him. Not with guilt or expectation, but with a quiet trust that had taken root between them. He stepped into the main hall, where most of the lights had been dimmed. A single display case stood illuminated near the center of the room, and Ava waited beside it, her hands behind her back. "I have something for you," she said. Ethan smiled gently. "More than this place already is." Ava bit her lip, then pulled out a small, square object covered in soft cloth. She placed it carefully inside the lit case and uncovered it. It was a miniature model, an intricately designed 3D replica of an old apartment. Peeling linoleum floors, a couch with one leg replaced by books, a kitchen counter scratched and worn from years of use, a tiny window with paper snowflakes taped to it. Ethan stared at it, breath caught in his throat. "This was our apartment," Ava said quietly. "Before Mom died. Before I knew you." His eyes welled immediately. "I made it in design class," she continued. "Miss Pollard said to build something that shaped us. Most kids did their dream houses. I built this. Because this was the beginning." Ethan knelt beside the case, his hand gently pressing to the glass like he could touch the pass through it. Ava, she sat beside him, crossing her legs the way she used to in kindergarten, before she even knew his name. "Mom used to call it our brave little home. It was small, but it had everything we needed. Except you, I guess. He didn't flinch at the truth. He'd spent months learning how to accept it. I would have given anything to have been there. I know, and maybe if you had, it would have changed everything. But this home? It made me who I am. And now that I know you, I wanted you to see it too. He looked over at her, her growing frame silhouetted in the soft light. There was something in her gaze, so much of Isabel, yes, but also something uniquely hers. Stronger, softer, wiser. You didn't have to do this, he whispered. Ava smiled gently. I wanted to, so you wouldn't forget who we were. Before, so you'd remember what's real. He nodded, unable to find words. Only tears. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. You don't have to be the man in the magazine anymore. You could just be Dad. That's enough. And in that moment, with her hand slipping into his, Ethan knew she was right. Not because he had succeeded, but because he had finally learned what success really meant. It wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or Forbes profiles. It was held in a child's forgiveness, in the quiet grace of a second chance, in the memory of a small apartment where love had survived the absence of everything else. He stood slowly, Ava by his side. I think your mom will be proud of you, he said. Ava looked up at him. I think she'd be proud of you too. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Walker believed that might actually be true. No ending, only renewal. It was the kind of morning that asked you to slow down. The kind of morning when light falls gently through yellowing leaves and the world seems to exhale. In the backyard of a modest but lovingly cared-for home in Cambridge, Ethan Walker sat on a worn wooden bench, a steaming cup of tea in his hand. The morning breeze carried the earthy scent of autumn, mixing with the faint sweetness of basil from Ava's garden pots. Across from him, Ava nestled into a hammock, a sketchbook balanced on her knees. Her hair was loosely braided, strands catching sunlight like amber threads. Beside her, Clara sipped from her own cup, wrapped in a hand-knit shawl that had once belonged to Isabel. 3 generations. Not bloodline alone, but connection, presence. Dad, Ava said, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Ethan turned. She didn't call him that often, not out of defiance, but because she said it needed to feel right in the moment. Every time she did, it struck him in the chest like a sunrise. I still remember the first time I saw you. I didn't know what you meant to me. I wasn't sure if you'd be permanent, she said, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her drawing. Ethan waited, breath caught. But now I think the most important thing isn't the sapphire bracelet or the stories Mom left behind. It's that you showed up, and you stayed. He swallowed hard, blinking against tears. I wish I could have been there sooner. Ava looked up. But you're here now. You didn't quit, even when I pushed you away, even when it got ugly. Clara reached over and gently squeezed Ethan's hand. You learned to be a father the way most of us learn anything worth doing, through failure and love. Ethan glanced toward the tall trees lining the back fence. When he had first stood here months ago, he was unsure of everything. Now this space, this shared quiet, was sanctuary. I'm not a miracle, he said softly. I'm just someone who finally understood what mattered. Ava set down her sketchbook and walked over to him. She held his hand, her smaller fingers curling into his palm. That's exactly why it worked, she said. That afternoon, the three of them walked down to the community center. The wind had picked up, tugging playfully at scarves and jackets. Inside, the building buzzed with activity. Kids laughing in the coding lab, teens rehearsing a short play about resilience in the arts room. Ava darted off to meet her friends, but not before giving Ethan a quick, instinctive hug. He watched her disappear down the hallway, her energy filling the space like music. She's different now, Sophia Garcia, the center director, said as she approached. Ethan nodded. She's stronger, more open. Sophia smiled. She's also deeply loved. That does something to a child. They walked toward the new digital media room, a space funded by the Isabel Hart Foundation. On one wall, a mural stretched from floor to ceiling, half painted by Ava, half filled in by kids from the neighborhood. In the center, two figures holding hands. One had Isabel's unmistakable hair. The other wore Ethan's watch. I think she found a way to tell our story, Ethan murmured. Sophia studied it. I think she's still writing it. Later that evening, they returned home. Clara prepared stew, and Ava set the table without being asked. Ethan brought out the photo album he'd spent weeks curating, a mix of old photographs of Isabel and new ones of Ava, side by side. I thought we could add to this together, he said. If you want. Ava opened to the first page and smiled. I think Mom would like that. They spent an hour flipping through the pages, talking about everything and nothing. The dog, a scruffy rescue Ava had named Pixel, curled at Ethan's feet. When dinner was done and the table cleared, Ava stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Do you think people get second chances even when they don't deserve them? She asked. Ethan joined her. I think second chances are exactly what remind us we're human. We don't earn them. We accept them with gratitude. She nodded slowly, her reflection merging with his in the glass. Then I'm glad I gave you. 1. As the season edged toward winter, Ethan continued his work with the foundation. Not as a figurehead, but as a mentor. He took joy in details now. Jordan's breakthroughs in coding, the gentle encouragement Ava offered her peers, the laughter that echoed through hallways built on grief, rebuilt with grace. One chilly morning, Ava handed Ethan a sealed envelope. It's for Mom, she said. Grandma found it in her art supplies. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single page. Isabel's handwriting curled gently across the paper. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means life didn't go the way either of us planned. I'm sorry for not telling you, for not giving you the choice. But I was scared you'd come back out of duty, not love. Ava deserves more than duty. She deserves joy, wonder, the kind of presence I saw in you once when you weren't hiding behind ambition. If you ever do meet her, please don't try to be perfect. Just be honest, be there, and maybe teach her how to build something that lasts. That's all I ever wanted. Love, Isabel. Ethan folded the letter, pressing it to his chest. A deep, healing breath filled his lungs. He didn't need to build empires anymore. He was building something far more fragile and far more real, a life that mattered. Ava joined him, slipping her hand into his. Ready to go, Dad? She asked. He nodded, tears warming the corners of his eyes. Yeah, he said. Let's go home. Not what you build, but who you come home to. Sometimes we believe we're doing everything right. Building a career, checking off milestones, accumulating accomplishments others admire. We wake before dawn, hustle through packed calendars, and fall into bed long after the world has gone quiet, convinced that success is a matter of motion and sacrifice. For years, that was my life, and perhaps yours too. But then, like Ethan Walker in the story we followed, something subtle yet seismic begins to shift. A question that refuses to be ignored. What is all of this for? Ethan, a billionaire CEO, had the world at his fingertips, private elevators, global accolades, meetings that shaped industries. Yet behind all the accolades, there was silence. No shared laughter echoing in his penthouse. No fingerprints on the glass, but his own. His life was immaculately curated and utterly alone. That's where many of us find ourselves in quieter moments, especially as we move into middle age. We've sacrificed birthdays, dinner tables, and real conversations at the altar of productivity. We've traded connection for convenience. But as Ethan learns, when life finally cracks open, not through tragedy, but through unexpected humanity, the truth arrives with a quiet but undeniable force. It's not what you build that defines your legacy, but who you come home to. The moment Ethan saw the sapphire bracelet on Ava's wrist, the one he had given Isabel over a decade ago, was more than a plot twist. It was the physical embodiment of memory, loss, and a future not yet written. In my own life, I remember finding an old photo of my daughter tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in years. She must have slipped it there when she was still in middle school, her handwriting small but certain on the back. So you don't forget what really matters. I hadn't forgotten her, of course. I was working hard for her, but I had somehow stopped working with her. That photo didn't just bring back memories. It brought back a version of myself I didn't realize I had lost. Like Ethan, I hadn't seen the distance growing until it was too wide to cross in a single step. But healing as the story reminds us, doesn't always come in grand gestures. It begins in quiet, steady choices. Choosing to listen instead of lecture. Choosing to show up, not just provide. Choosing to sit on the floor next to your child, not just stand on stages delivering keynote speeches. What struck me most about Ethan wasn't that he found his daughter. It was how he approached her once he did. He didn't storm into her life waving legal rights or financial power. He sat with her, waited, earned each piece of trust like a man who finally understood that love, like art, isn't efficient. It's patient. In a world that often encourages instant results and quick fixes, Ethan's decision to step back from his company, not in disgrace, but in rediscovery, felt revolutionary. Not because it was grand, but because it was real, and because it forced me to ask myself, what have I missed in my own chase? There's a quote I keep now above my desk. Success is getting what you want. Fulfillment is giving what you have. Ethan gave Ava something no boardroom could, presence. And she gave him something no IPO ever could, forgiveness. Their story reminded me that every moment we are given is a second chance to be softer, braver, more attentive. To love not just in principle, but in practice. Today, I make different choices. I still work hard, but I no longer miss the things that matter to catch the things that vanish. I take the phone calls from family, even when I'm in the zone. I say yes to sitting through the school play, even when I know it will be too long and slightly off-key. Because as Ava reminded Ethan and me, the most valuable gift isn't the bracelet. It's the person who doesn't walk away. You don't have to be a billionaire to rewrite your story. You just have to stop long enough to listen to it and to the people inside it. You have to be willing to trade control for connection and productivity for presence. That's what Ethan did, and that's what we can do too. So as you finish watching or reading this story, maybe take one small step. Call someone you've been too busy for. Write a letter you've long avoided. Look at an old photo not as nostalgia, but as a compass, because your second chance might already be here, not wrapped in luxury or applause, but in the quiet voice of someone who still believes in you, waiting patiently for you to come home. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.